Acts chapter 1, and just a couple of verses this morning, 3 verses from verse 9. Acts 1:9. After Jesus said this, he was taken up before their very eyes, and a cloud hid him from their sight. They were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. "Men of Galilee," they said, "why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." Reading to the end of the 11th verse of this portion of God's precious word. When Jesus had spoken these things while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. What an event that was. What a surprise it must have been to them. And yet it was an important fulfillment. This coming Thursday is Ascension Day. Now, I know we don't make a whole lot of these special days that way in our church. Some of the more liturgical churches make much more emphasis of that. But I think it's important that we remember them. You know, sometimes we remember Mother's Day, Father's Day, and Groundhog Day, and dear knows what else. But what about the Christian holiday celebrations? And so Ascension Day, I think, has sometimes been lost, but it's got an important message to us. 40 days after the resurrection of Jesus Christ was the time for Jesus to leave. Yes, he'd risen. He met back with his disciples and some of his followers. It might be noted that during that 40 days of meeting, he met with believers. We don't hear him meeting with unbelievers. During his earthly ministry up till then, much of it was reaching out to the unbelievers, wasn't it? Teaching the crowds, feeding the crowds, healing the sick. There's no emphasis on the believers particularly. But in those 40 days, he came to meet with the believers. And I believe that the risen Christ today comes to meet with his people. Sometimes people that don't believe in him might say to some of us Christians, you can talk about this, but I don't see Jesus, or I don't experience Jesus coming. Well, if they'd turn their hearts over to him, then they'd see him. Amen? Isn't it wonderful when we know the Lord, know that he does walk with us and talk with us? The group last night sang that song in the garden, you know, where he walks with me and he talks with me along life's narrow way. And that's a wonderful experience. As we go through life and our various walks, our various activities, just to know that God is there. He's with his people. He wants to be with others. He's still reaching out to the lost, and how does he do it? Basically through us, doesn't he? Through individuals. Through each of us working together. Not leaving it for somebody else. In Sealy's Bay, where I live, the holiest church there they had a situation similar to us, that their pastor, who had served for quite a while, had been training home studies, as Charmaine had done, and he was ordained just not too long before your previous pastor was, so there's a lot of parallels there. And they've been without a pastor that time, but as of this week, they have an interim pastor, just appointed for a year to fill in. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But I've heard some of the things, she's a lady pastor, and some of the people have been saying, I hope she can reach out and reach new people and bring them in. And whenever I've heard that around there, because I have quite a contact with a lot of the people of the church there, small congregation like ours, I've said, yeah, but don't leave it to her. You got to all, it means everybody working together. Each of us has our own circle of friends and influence. And if we sit back and say, well, let the pastor do it, or let the church board do it, or let the Sunday school superintendent do it, or let somebody else do it, some might get done, but not as much, is it? I'm emphasizing to them, you need to all be working together. Well, really, what I say to them, I can say here too, don't we? It's a little easier to say it there because I'm not the pastor here. I don't want to look like I'm saying you do all the work. I should show you an article I wrote for our Gospel Tidings a number of years ago about Satan applying for unemployment because he had people all convinced not to do anything. But that's beside the point. Jesus came to meet with his people for 40 days, on and off, meeting them at different situations, and we've talked about some of that the last few weeks from Easter until now. He had taught. He had instructed them. He had prepared them for the future. And that's what Jesus is doing today, isn't he? Preparing us for a glorious future with him. And then one day, he ascended into heaven. He left them, as far as this earth was concerned. Oh, he was with them in spirit, and he still is, but they didn't see him physically anymore. And that must have seemed like a great loss to them, because they'd been used to him being there. That's what makes it so hard when we lose anyone, whether it's through death or whether it's through them moving away somewhere. How many have noticed that when family have moved away to get work or go to college or whatever it is? And we miss them. We're used to them being there in the home. Well, sometimes we might be glad then, but that doesn't last very long, does it? I've heard people say, oh, I can't wait till the kids grow up and get off on their own and we got the place to ourselves. But it can be awfully empty. That empty nest syndrome that they talk about, whatever that is. Yes, it's hard when they're not there. We might say, well, they think of us and they phone back and forth or they email back and forth or text us. People don't seem to talk anymore, but they text and they email and all this stuff. I don't know where people are nowadays, whether they're never home or whether they just don't answer their phones even. But I find it seems easier to text somebody. I know for the concert, I made quite a number of phone calls this week to tell people about it. I hardly spoke to anybody. Time after time, I dial and get that message, about inbox or whatever, and so I talk to the machine. I'm getting more used to talking to machines than I am to people in this day and age. But I don't know, I guess everybody was out or away from their phones or whatever it was. But that's the day and age that we live in. But yes, we have those contacts, but it's not the same as having the person there, is it? Sitting down and talking. And incidentally, that's another thing regarding church attendance too, isn't it? It's wonderful to be in church where we can see people. Not watching television. Yeah, you can hear a preacher and you can hear the good music and all this stuff. But it's not the same. Missing something very valuable when we're not in that fellowship of people. There's something about being with people that God blesses and uses. It's important for us. But this day Jesus was taken away. Yet he still lives. Remember, he raised Lazarus from the dead, but no doubt Lazarus died again. We're not told, but everybody did. Lazarus isn't still alive. But Jesus was different. He rose from the dead. He associated with the disciples and believers for 40 days. And then one day, as he was gathered with his disciples, some of his most faithful group, they were on the hillside. And he talked with them. And suddenly he began to raise up, and their eyes followed him up into the sky. What is taking place? Where is he going? What is he doing now? Can you imagine the confusion, the mystery of it all? I mean, there's something about gravity that holds us on the ground. We cannot go up. We can jump, but we come down. We don't keep going up. I've sometimes watched in the Olympics or games like that where people are in a high jump, and some of them can jump, 5 or 6 feet off the ground, but once they get over that bar, they come down. And then I watch a pole vaulter come, and with that pole, he can plant it right and jump up maybe 17, 18 feet. But he comes down. He doesn't keep on going. But when Jesus ascended, he went up into the clouds, and the clouds hid him from their sight. He was gone. Oh, he was gone, but not forgotten. Up, up, and away, and yet still here. Alive, real, with us. We experience his presence. Because he left earth, he can be now present everywhere. See, that was the limitation Jesus had when he was on earth, wasn't it? That he could only be one place and one time like the rest of us. He had come into human flesh. He was limited by human flesh. And there were times when he was with his disciples, and there were times when he left them. And sometimes they didn't know where he was. Sent them across the sea one day, Sea of Galilee, and he went off to pray. And there they were out in the sea, and the storm came up. And some of us around here know in some of these lakes how the storm can come up suddenly and be very threatening. And they say the Sea of Galilee, because of the location there, it was common to have severe storms. And so they were there. And where was Jesus? He wasn't there with them. He was off praying somewhere in the hills until he came walking in the water to them, of course. Yes, he could only be one place at one time. But now, because he ascended, he can be everywhere present. Yes, he's here in Trenton, Quinte West, or whatever we call it here. But he's in every one of our other 50-odd churches around Ontario, the Church of Nazarene. Not only that, but our missionaries are working in South America, in Africa, in Asia, throughout Europe, even in Russia, everywhere. And God is there. Jesus is present because he ascended. He left this world behind, in a sense, physically, so that he could be everywhere spiritually. And we be growing in him. And the good news for us, of course, is that after our resurrection, we will live forever. This life is temporary. Songwriter says, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. We're going to a better place. Oh, we're enjoying it here, I trust. I enjoy life. I'm ready to go to heaven when God calls me, but I'm not anxious. I'm enjoying it. I hear some people say, oh, I can't wait to get to heaven. I could wait. I'm enjoying it here. God is with us. It's a great thing, walking and talking with the Lord and living for Him and amongst His people here. But there's better beyond. We'll live forever. Incidentally, everybody's going to live forever. Some with God and some without God. And I tremble to think what it would be like for people living without God for eternity, allowing the devil to have complete control in their lives. But we can know God, and we can walk with Him, and we can be growing spiritually. That's why we're here. But we're to walk by faith. Yes, He lives, but we walk by faith with Him. Sight is so temporary. That's why Paul said when he was writing to the Corinthians in the 5th chapter and the 7th verse, for we walk by faith, not by sight. People without God can only walk by sight. When we know Him, we walk by faith. He knows us more than just the physical things around us. Some people only see the physical. But by faith, we can see the eternal. We can know the ever-living, ever-present God. And we serve Him, though we do not see Him physically. We know that He's there. You know, there are some people that only work when the supervisor is there. I remember when I was apprenticing in carpentry, and some of the fellows, particularly the plasterers, now I don't know why, it just happened to be them. They had the greatest way of knowing when the boss was coming, and they'd be, just not doing too much sometimes. But the minute the boss's car started down the road, they'd be working like anything. The boss would come and see them working hard and think, oh, they're doing a great job, I think sometimes he wondered why there wasn't more done between his trips. But there are some people like that. They can only do things when somebody's watching them. But the fact is that God is watching all the time, isn't He? He's never fooled. And I don't mean that from a sense that He's just driving us, by no means. But He is present. We serve Him out of faith. Not because we see Him. Not because we might be punished if we don't serve Him. That's a false idea. But out of faith. We walk with God, knowing that He's there, and knowing that He is our strength for every situation. How many times we run into things and we feel it's just too much for us. Can't handle it. Can't do that job. Sometimes we're asked to do a job. It might be in church, it might be somewhere else, and we say, well, I can't do that. I don't have the strength, I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, don't have the skill. Well, yes, those things might all be true. But if it's God's will, He'll supply the strength and the skill, and He'll help us along. And we have to be obedient to Him and let Him work through us. And when He shows us something to do, if it's a skill and He shows us where we can get that skill, then we do. That's why we have schools and colleges and trade schools and all these things, isn't it? So we can get it. God leads us to the right place gain the skill that we have to do his will in his way. His presence is with us. But you see, when he was here physically, his presence was a hindrance to faith in a way. I don't want you to take that too far, but, they didn't have to depend on him for faith because he was there. They could see it being done. When we walk into the kitchen, if you come here yesterday in the afternoon and you come up here and the tables were bare, but you had faith that there was going to be a spaghetti supper here. But you didn't have any evidence of it, unless you had a good smell. But if you went down into the kitchen and you saw the spaghetti there and the ladies working hard on it and the oven going and all those things, then you could see it. And you say, well, I guess it's worthwhile staying, not going here. But if you stayed up here, you had to wait in faith that it was coming. You didn't have any real evidence. Well, when Jesus was here, they could see him. They didn't have to walk by faith. He was there. They were watching him perform miracles. They were hearing him teach. They were feeding on the loaves and the fishes that he multiplied. But now he was gone. Many misunderstood him there. But now they had to walk by faith. And 2,000 years later, we walk by faith. He's real. Wasn't it last night? Didn't they sing, he's real to me, he's real to me. Jesus is real to me. He's all I need. Maybe that's what they sang, but I think the second verse. He's all I need. Jesus is all I need. By faith, we know he's there. The resurrected, the ascended Christ is with us. Oh, it's better to walk with Christ in the dark than without him in the light. Yes, that might be. There might be pretty dark days sometimes. But God is there. We can walk with him by faith. And so we wait in expectation. That's what the 11th verse said. And this is the key to the whole thing. Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. This same Jesus will come back. He will return personally. I think that's the key words in that verse. The same Jesus. Not just the Spirit. Not just some other form. Prophets had come and gone through the years. But this same Jesus will come back. He will come visibly. It says in Revelation 1 verse 7, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him. Every eye shall see him. I don't know how it's going to all work out, but God has a way of doing these things. We can speculate all we like, but the fact is he will come. We will see him. That was a promise. Because he went away, because he ascended into heaven. Those men that came and stood by the disciples as Jesus ascended into the cloud, these others, a couple of angels, came down and said, why are you looking up? Why are you expecting to see him again? He's coming back someday in like manner. And we're still waiting for that day. But we're getting closer to it all the time. And we have that confidence that Jesus is coming. And we don't have to speculate about all the details. Some people like to get into all the details of the pre-tribulation and post-tribulation and premillennial and postmillennial and all these things. I'm glad that our church doesn't get involved in a lot of that. I mean, it's not that we don't believe in some of those things, but we say that all it says in our doctrine is that Jesus is coming again. And we're looking forward to that. We're assured of that. In His time, in His way, we don't have to know all the details. God knows, and that's all that matters. He knows what He's doing, and He will come again, and He will gather His own. No, He gathered His own before He left there, didn't He? That's what we see back in the earlier part of that chapter. Verse 4 said, being assembled together with them, that's His disciples, He commanded them that they should not depart from Jerusalem, but wait for the promise of the Father, which saith He, ye have heard of me. We'll maybe talk about that a little more next week. But He had gathered these disciples together to be with Him on that mount when He was to leave them and ascend into heaven. And He comes back to gather His own. He didn't gather all of Judea. He didn't gather all of Jerusalem. He gathered those who knew Him, those who had walked and talked with Him, to be there to see His ascension. And one day, when He comes back, He's going to come for His own. Oh, I want to be among that number. Oh, I want to be there. Wherever it is. I mean, it can be right here. And somehow, wherever we are, whether it's in Quinte West or wherever, when Jesus comes, we're all going to see Him. All those who know Him. I kind of suspect that unbelievers may not even be aware of it. But they might be. And they might have to bow then before Him, though they never bowed before. But for His own, those that He is gathering, those that are heeding His call and coming to Him by faith, accepting Jesus Christ as their Savior and serving Him as their Lord, when He comes back, they'll see Him. He'll gather them onto Himself and take us home to that heaven. And those that have been laid in the grave will be raised again to meet the Lord in the air. And we'll all go to be with Him forever and ever in the joyful experience of living with God in the place that He's prepared for His own for eternity. Oh, what a day that will be. And my Jesus I shall see. And I'll look upon His face and see in Him all the glory. Oh, haven't we got a lot to look forward to? Because Jesus rose, because Jesus ascended, and because Jesus, this same Jesus, is coming again, returning for His own. He will gather them together, gather His people. Oh, friends, are you among that people? Have you committed your life to Him? Are you walking by faith with the living Christ? What a glory it is. And if you're not, why not ask Him into your life even this morning? And begin living for Him. And let Him guide you and look after your problems. Yes, we all have problems, but if we're facing them alone, they're big problems. If we're facing them with Jesus, no problem. He can look after them all. Are you looking forward expectantly to His return? Will you be ready when He comes? Can you say, "Come, Lord Jesus, I'm looking forward to seeing You."